Now we're on Daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis. Avol Yoseres Ushtei Klais Lo Ksiva Begufon. But with regard to the Aktorah of Yoseres HaKovet, etc., that's not written at all in the parsha of Parhelim Dovashal Tzibur, and therefore he cannot teach me anything about the soyer of Avodah Zorah. Lo, I might say that in the case of the soyer of Avodah Zorah, I don't need to burn on the Mizbeach the Kloyos and Yosef HaKavod, Kamash Malon. That's why we need the additional Hekesh to apply that din that we learned from Paro Shal Mashiach to Helim Dovashal Tzibur, and from Helim Dovashal Tzibur to Chatosam to the case of Soyer of Avodas Kochov. And now we're up to Omer Avhuna, Bereder of Nosel of Papa. So the Gemara now is going back to the Brisa once again. Again, what we're about to embark upon here on Mem Aleph and Beis is again sort of the second floor that's built on the first floor, which is the Sugya Daf Mem on the previous Amud. And that is that it seems that way back, I think it's even before Daf Mem. Anyway, there was a brisa that seemed to indicate that lapar, the word lapar in Vayikra Daled, is, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, that's an allusion to Yom Kippur. So you remember I told you at the beginning that we started here that there's also a fourth piece of the puzzle here, and that's the par of Yom Kippur, which is likewise a chatos hapnimis. And therefore, based on Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, we came to the conclusion that the word lapar is not referring to par helim dovashal tzibur as Rav Papa had it, but rather it's referring to paroshal Yom Kippur. And this has to do with the question of how many of the hazos of the par of Yom Kippurim are likuv are absolutely critical. And we're going to derive, according to Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, from that word lapar, that all the hazayos, which probably are, I think there are 43 of them, all told on Yom Kippurim, they're all liikuv. If you leave out one, the whole deal is off. Now, Rav Papa himself didn't have that. He rejected that. And apparently, he explained that, the allusion here in the pasuk to Yom Kippurim, that has to do with the other halachas that we spoke about how to do the tfilas etzba, es and bedam and tefillah, which has to do with the fact that there has to be enough blood initially in the mizrach so that he can have enough dam to do all the hazoyos. It's not enough if later on he goes back to the neck of the animal and collects more dam. In any event, the Gemara that we just saw here on Amud Aleph brought a support text for Rav Papa. So Amalei, fine. So we're talking to Rav Papa, and we say V'hatana l'Rabos par Yom Kippurim l'chomasha she'amur be'inyan ka'ama. Right? It seems that the Tana that we brought in order to l'sayel to support your opinion, Rav Papa, had stated that la par in the parsha of Par Helim Dovashal Tzibur was ultimately coming to teach me something about the par of Yom Kippurim. And you're telling me it's coming to teach me something about the Oseres HaKoved and so forth in the Soyer of Avodah Zarah. I don't get it. It seems to be telling me something about the par of Yom Kippurim. So Papa answers Tanoi, you're right. There are two different approaches, and there's a controversy in terms of how to derive halachas and where to put things in perspective in terms of the parshios. And it's a difference between what we call Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel and Tana Debei Rav. So apparently in the Beis Medrash of Rav, they had a whole bunch of brisos, and in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Shmuel, who was one generation before, they had a whole bunch of brisos. So now, From whence do we derive that all the hazoyos, the 43 hazoyos of Yom Kippurim, are all likuva, they're all essential? Well, according to Tanit Rav, Merabe Hachi, we're going to derive it from Vehapar. Whereas, according to Tanit Rabbi Shmuel, Lo Merabe Hachi, we're not going to derive from Lapar, but rather Lapar is going to be used to teach me about Yoseres HaKoved in the case of a soyer of Avodah Zarah. Tanit Rabbi Shmuel. Now, we have a little bit of digression here, which for me personally is a little bit of a breath of fresh air because I'm working my kishkas off here with this sugya. Right. So it's a little bit of an agadita. Unfortunately, it's one of the shortest agaditas I've ever seen. I wish it was longer. I usually don't, want agaditas to drag on, but anyway. Tana debei Rabbi Shmuel. Right? We derived the laws of the requirement of Haktoras, Yoseres HaKoved, and Shtei Kloyos in Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, even though it's not written not even hinted at there, from Par Mashiach. So, Rabbi Shmuel is asking a homiletical question. Why is it that the Torah omitted all these details about the Torah in the parsha of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur and wrote it instead in the par of the Mashiach, Kol Mashiach? Mashal Amel Basav Adam Shezoim Al Oavo Umiek B'Sirchonu Mipnei Chibasa. Let's say that one of the the close friends of the king violated the law, and now the king feels very bad about his beloved friend, and therefore when the king has to mention the offense, the criminal offense, he minimizes it because of that close relationship. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Nimshal, has a close relationship to Klal Yisrael, and if Klal Yisrael Rovat Tzibur violates a Chi of Kares and they have to bring a Par Helim Shel Tzibur, the Torah is going to minimize its discussion and completely omit the requirement of Haktoras Shtei Kloyos. V'Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel. The same Tana Beishol had another homiletic interpretation. Mipnei ma nemra paroches hakodesh b'par kohen Mashiach v'lo nemar b'par helim davar shel tzibur. Why is it that the Torah in the parsha of Par Kohen Mashiach has a lot to say about the paroches hakodesh? When the dam had to go, let's say, not necessarily on the paroches, but let's say in the direction of the paroches, the curtain, and this is in the Heichal, not in the Kodesh Kadoshim. And in Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, nothing is mentioned. Torah completely omits these hazoyos. He quotes the pasuk here in the footnote. It says in Vayikra Dalet, "V'hiza ben Adam sheva pam l'fnei Hashem es pnei paroches hakodesh." And that's in the parsha of Kohen Mashiach, Parsha Kohen Mashiach. But then, if we fast forward about 8 psukim, and we get to the parsha of Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, he's a Sheva Pam L'fnei Hashem Es Pnei HaParoches. A very short and abridged version. There's no mention here about the Paroches HaKodesh, Mashal, as we say, Mashal, so Mitzarcha, V'Mali Shalom Miskayemes, in Ruba Sarcha, Ein Pamali Shalom Miskayemes. So therefore, if you have a king and he's got an entire, what shall I say, council, I don't know what to call it, and most of them went off the beaten path and committed an offense, then his whole Pamalia is just going to fall apart. And the king has no Pamalia, now he has no council. So what does he do? He tries to minimize it. So if the Kohen Gadol himself transgresses something, okay, the Kedushas HaMikdash is still intact. Nothing is lost. So you could talk about Paroch HaKodesh. But in the case of Par Helim Davar, where most of the Tzibur committed a violation against, so to speak, God, then to some extent the holiness of the temple is impacted. And therefore it doesn't say, in the parsha of Par Helim Davar Shel Tzibur, it doesn't say what is it called? No, Parochas HaKodesh. Okay, now we go back to the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Lefichach im nosan kulam b'kitikunam." Okay, so this has to do with Machshavas Pigul. And the paradox of Machshavas Pigul is that Machshavas Pigul during one avoda of the four avodos is valid in inverted commas, valid meaning it generates a chiv kares of Pigul. That's only because everything else was done perfectly. So, for example, if let's say at the time of the Shechita, the Kohen had in mind Chutzlas Mano, and then at the time of the Zrika, he had in mind Shalol Shma, let's say in a Chatos, then it would not become Pigul, because Pigul is contingent on the fact that everything else was done perfectly. Tanan Hossam, now we're going to talk about a Karban Mincha, which has two parts to it. Number one, there's the Kometz, and then there's the Levona. And Pigul b'Kometz v'lo b'Levona, b'Levona v'lo b'Kometz, and the Mishnah in Masechta Menachos on Daf Tes Zayin records Machlokas Tanoim between the Tanakama and Rabbi Meir. What's the deal if in the two parts of the Avod of a Mincha he had in mind Chutz Lizmano of one of the two? It could either be that he had a Machshavas Pigul at the time of the Kometz, but not at the time of the Levona, or vice versa. Rabbi Meir Omer, Pigul v'chayoven alekos chachomim me'embo karis achi yifaga b'chol amati. Oh, now the simple pshat before Reish Lakish is going to be that there's a machlokas tanoim about whether or not there's Pigul b'chatzi mati. In the case of the permissibility, the heter, that's chal, in order to eat the karban mincha, we have two material. We need both the kometz and we need the levona. So the Rabbanan here are going to say that ein bo kares achi yifaga b'chol matir. He only had a machshavas pigul in one of the two matirim, and that's half a matir. And therefore the machshavas pigul is not chal. Rabbi Meir apparently holds, until Reish Lakish again, that no, you could have a machshavas pigul that is mafagel the korban, even if it's only on one of the two matirim, whether it be on the levona or whether it be on the kometz. On Rav Shem ben Lakish, no, that's not what Rav Meir is talking about. Rav Meir also agrees that ein mefaglin b'chatzi matir. Lo tema time to Rav Yehuda be kosovar that he holds mefaglin b'chatzi matir. No, even Rabbi Meir concedes to the Rabbana that ein mefaglin ela b'matir sholem in one in the entire matir b'kula matir ela hachma eskinon ki on shenos hanes hakomitz machshava v'alavona b'shtika. What happened was that he had a machshava mefuresh, explicit machshava. He maybe even declared it verbally that he wants this kometz to be eaten. In other words, the remains from the kometz after he burns the kometz on the mizbeach to remain to be eaten chutz lizmano, tomorrow. When he got to Levona, jughead, he had nothing in his mind. It was shtika. So what does Rabbi Meir hold? Rabbi Meir holds kasavar. When a person doesn't explicate what he has in mind, we assume he has in mind exactly what he had in mind initially and explicitly. And Memela says Reish Lakish, this is a case of mafagil b'kol amate, because he basically had a machshavas pigul not only at the time of whatever was number one, let's say Levona. I'm sorry, yeah, it could be Levona, or number one was the Kometz. And Memela on the second half, he had the same das. Ein adam osa ella al das rishon. Umimai. Which birdie taught you that, Reish Lakish? Midakatani, because it says in the Mishnah. Lefichach im nosan kulam kitiknon. V'acha shelo kitiknon posel v'ein bo kares. So what happened? There were, again, in the case of achatas pnimis, you need all four matanos. And if, let's say, the Kohen was doing great and he had the right intentions until he got to the last fourth of the matanos hadam, and now when he gets to the fourth one, he had a machshavas pigul and ein bo kares. Because as we said before, you have to have all the avodos that are perfect. Ha'achas shelo kitikana v'kulam kitikunam pigel. What happens if he started off with a machshav? Not the case in the Mishnah where he had a machshavas pigel on the last of the avodos, but what happens if he had a machshavas pigel on the first of the avodos? And then all the other machshavas were kitikuno, with the proper intention. So the Tana of the Mishnah would say, in that case, there's pigel. Well, why should there be pigel? It's only a chatzimata. You can't say it's a rabbanon. Ha'amri eimafag chatzimata. El Reb Meir, it could only be Reb Meir by process of elimination. And time the Reb Meir mishum mefaglu mechatzimatahu. If that be the case, then afilu kitani nami. Why does the Mishnah have to say it's a case where he had he had an invalid machshava, implying that if he had started with a machshavas pigel and then he didn't have he had shtika afterwards, it would be pigel. La mishum tekasav kol sal das rishona who else Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak liolam rabbanani. No, I'm going to reject Reish Lakish's interpretation. And maybe the Mishnah is actually reflecting the shita of Rabbanan, who hold that ein mefaglim mechatzi matir. Umay kitikunam kitiknam lepigul. Okay, now at this point, it gets really, really complicated. And I don't want to botch this up. It's at least a half hour, So I think what we're going to do is we're going to stop here, and I'll have to fill it in on our own because again, it's very, very technical, with variables going up, down, and inside out.
Right.
All right. So let me take this opportunity to wish you a great week, and next week I can do what would be 2:30 on my clock next week because you'll be changing the clock. In honor of your beloved President of the United States, Trump, that the Canadians love so much. Okay, cool.